What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Bush coming at you solo today to go through my running back starts and sits for week 3 of fantasy football. As you guys would have seen last week, I go through every matchup, every game, every backfield, and kind of break down how it's shaking out based on the 2 weeks of information that we have, and also who you should start this upcoming week in your fantasy football matchups, and about the range that I have them ranked in my rankings and who I would start them over. All that stuff will be covered in this video. I will be making reference to my rankings a lot. So if you guys want access to them, as you know, there are 3 ways you can get access. You can go to the fantasystockexchange.com. For $20, you can get both me and Danny's rankings for the entire season. You can also go to underdogfantasy.com, sign up using promo code FSE, play some of the games that they have on there during the season, and you'll also get access to the rankings for free. Or you can become a Patreon member at patreon.com/fantasystockexchange and get the rankings that way as well. So 3 ways to get the rankings. But before we get into anything, we're going to hit the intro. To start it off, Panthers and Texans, Thursday night football. Panthers are going to Houston for this game. This is really a gross Thursday night football game, if you ask me, Panthers versus Texans. But breaking news, you should start Christian McCaffrey if you weren't aware. Obviously, good luck to anybody who has to play against Christian McCaffrey this week, because playing against the Texans defense, I mean, this guy could go hog wild, could be a 45-point week type of outing for Christian McCaffrey. So good luck to you if you play against Christian McCaffrey, because it's probably going to be a tough week for you. Sit all of the Texans running back. This backfield remains a mess. And as you guys can see on the screen right now, David Johnson, Mark Ingram, Phillip Lindsay, and Rex Burkhead are all involved. And as you can see, they all kind of have differing roles. David Johnson looks to be the long down and distance back, the 2-minute drill back, the guy that's going to get most of the receiving work, whereas Mark Ingram is the early down back, the guy who's going to get most of the carries. And then they're going to mix in Phillip Lindsay on both sides of the spectrum. So overall, as a backfield, this is just not one that I want a part of. This is not one that is, it's not in a high scoring offense, and it's a committee. So if you own a Texans running back, I suppose they're an okay stash. If anybody gets injured, maybe they get a big workload, but Mark Ingram and David Johnson are the only 2 that should even be rostered at this point. And even those guys are kind of hanging on by a thread. So to the next game that we have here is the Chargers at the Chiefs. Start Austin Eckler in this game. Start Clyde Edwards-Helaire in this game, or flex Clyde Edwards-Helaire in this game. On the Eckler side of things, as you guys can see, Austin Eckler is getting his usual role. Just, I figured I'd go over this real quick. 61% of the snaps, about 50% of the carries, 55% route participation. We'd like to see that up a little bit more. Good target share in this past week's game. 23% of the targets obviously was a big bounce back from the 0% of targets that he saw in week 1. But the encouraging thing is that inside the 5 attempt percentage, where he's getting 67% of the inside the 5 attempts for the Chargers offense, that was a big concern of mine coming into the season for Austin Eckler. And it's good to see him get that goal line role that we wanted to see him get, because we didn't want to see yet again Austin Eckler be taken off the field in favor of Josh Kelly or Larry Roundtree on the goal line, because we know Austin Eckler is good in that area. He was just never used that way. So Austin Eckler, a guy that you fire up into your lineups every single week. Now, a guy that you probably don't want to be firing up into your lineup based on what he just did on Sunday Night Football. But Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I have always been low on Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So this is not something new to me. This is exactly what I expected out of Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I got a lot of shit for saying that Clyde Edwards-Helaire was going to be a bust this year in fantasy, but looking at Clyde Edwards-Helaire's usage, it is exactly what we want to see out of the guy. He is 71% of the carries, 59% route participation. But the problem is he's not getting any targets, and he's not getting inside the 5 attempts, which the allure of the Chiefs offense, which I talked about, was kind of fake earlier in the offseason, was that this guy was going to get targeted and this guy was going to get all the red zone work. But the problem is they don't use their running backs that way. They don't run the ball in the red zone, especially inside the 5-yard line, because they have Patrick Mahomes. Why would you, force a 5'7" running back to try and run it into the end zone when you have the best quarterback in the world? So Clyde Edwards-Helaire, a guy still in that back end RB2 range for me. This doesn't really change my opinion of him. This, again, is exactly what I expected. He's not a guy that I want to be starting as my RB1 or anything like that, because I don't think he's very good. I just think he's Devin Singletary 2.0. A lot of people are going to be on the sell CEH train this week, and rightfully so. But fortunately, I didn't draft this guy anywhere because I saw him as a landmine. I hope you guys took that advice as well. But if you do actually have this problem, you do have Clyde Edwards-Helaire on your roster, here's what I would like to do if I have Clyde Edwards-Helaire. As you guys can see on the screen, these are some of the trades that have happened in Yahoo leagues in the past 2 days involving Clyde Edwards-Helaire. If you could sell Clyde Edwards-Helaire plus Melvin Gordon for Saquon Barkley, absolutely do that. Now, if you can't do that, which you probably won't be able to, Clyde Edwards-Helaire for some of these wide receiver 2 types like Chase Claypool, DJ Moore, if you can get Mike Evans somehow, that would be really good. Clyde Edwards-Helaire plus Jamar Chase for Deontay Johnson, David Montgomery. If you can execute a trade like that, that is how I'm going to get Clyde Edwards-Helaire off my roster. I do want to sell him if I own him because he's RB22 for me on the week, and I think that's where he's going to live in my rankings. Each and every week, he's going to be a back-end RB2. You need him to score a touchdown because he doesn't get the bulk of the carries. He doesn't get a lot of receiving work. He doesn't offer any big play upside because he's not a breakaway speed guy. And despite playing in a high-scoring offense, this is not a guy that gets a lot of goal line work either. So overall, he's just a low upside play. He's, exactly like Devin Singletary. He plays in a great offense too, but he doesn't get, the valuable work that we want Devin Singletary to get in the Bills offense. Same thing kind of applies for Clyde Edwards-Helaire in the Chiefs offense. Although, the percentage of the Chiefs backfield is good, it's just not getting the job done from a fantasy perspective. So that's what my kind of take on Clyde Edwards-Helaire. If you have him, try and sell him for some of the guys that I talked about already. If you have him and you need to start him, I suppose he's a good flex option. Cardinals at Jaguars, the next game that we have here. Both of these running backs are flex plays, Chase Edmonds and James Robinson. James Robinson is my RB25 as of right now, and we did see some good news actually for James Robinson this week. He got the feature role, which was a good thing because we saw Carlos Hyde a little bit more involved than we wanted to see in week one. The bad news of James Robinson, though, is the offense still sucks. It's still a bad offense, despite James Robinson seeing 73% of the snaps and 73% of the rushing attempts, good percentage of the routes, and a 10% target share. This is still a guy that is going to be a low upside option because this offense simply isn't going to score very much. Trevor Lawrence is clearly struggling. Urban Meyer is clearly struggling as a play caller and a head coach. So this is not an offense I want a part of from the running game, especially, but even in the passing game, as much as they're going to throw the ball, it's just not going to be very high efficiency offense. So overall, if you guys have any Jaguars players and people are willing to buy high on them, like Marvin Jones, DJ Chark, anybody like that, I'd be kind of looking to sell because this is an offense that's going to get you really frustrated as a fantasy owner because you're going to just see them constantly punting, constantly turning the ball over, not a lot of high scoring opportunities, 15, 20 points a game maximum. So James Robinson, a guy that is on the way up because of the usage, but not a guy that I'm very excited about. Back end RB2 type for me. Chase Edmonds, I have ahead of him actually as my RB20 on the week, and he has a good matchup versus this Jacksonville Jaguars run defense. This backfield is very clear, and it's exactly kind of what we expected coming into the season. As you guys can see on the screen, we talked about it last week, but I'm going to go over it again. Chase Edmonds is clearly the quote unquote starting running back on this team. 58% of the snaps in week one, 64% in week two. This is a 60% snap share type of starter, so barely a starting running back, but he is getting all of the routes pretty much. He is getting most of the targets. 15% target share in the first 2 weeks is very good. Getting targeted on the routes that he's running, and he's also the long down and distance and 2-minute drill running back. The problem is, and we haven't had this actually play out yet, but once they get inside the 5-yard line, what is Chase Edmonds' role? Because as you guys can see on the screen, James Conner is the short down and distance back. So I'd imagine he is going to get the goal line carries. And also we have to worry about Kyler Murray taking away the goal line carries. So Chase Edmonds, a guy that is going to live in back end RB2 range just because he does have big play upside. He does have good receiving upside, but he doesn't have that goal line role or the bulk of the carries to make him, in the top 15 running backs necessarily. So a guy that's going to live in this kind of 20 range all season, but a good matchup that you can flex him in. So to the Bears at the Browns, again, this one's pretty straightforward. We know which running backs are in this game. Start David Montgomery, start Nick Chubb as you always will, and you can flex Kareem Hunt in this game. This one really isn't rocket science. Montgomery has 20.5 opportunities per game so far in the first 2 weeks, which makes him an every week starter in my opinion. I know Damian Williams is involved to some degree, but it's not even to the same degree that Tariq Cohen was involved last year when he was healthy. So I'm very excited about David Montgomery. He's a guy that I think is going to be a back-end RB1, top 10 running back type this year in fantasy. Nick Chubb obviously is always in your lineup. He is not a guy that leaves your lineup. He may have a tougher game on the ground, though, against this Bears front, which is why I think Hunt could be a decent flex this week. Maybe they rely a little bit more on the receiving backs because they've suffered a lot of injuries with Odell Beckham still having not played a game this year, with Jarvis Landry moving to short-term IR. Maybe they rely a little bit more on Kareem Hunt. Maybe they rely on Nick Chubb on the ground as well a little bit more in this game. But this defense, this Bears front has held some good running backs to some, not so good performances, mainly Joe Mixon last week. So you're obviously still starting Nick Chubb, but it could be a bit of a down game from him from an efficiency standpoint on the ground. So to the next game we have here, Washington at Buffalo Bills. Start Antonio Gibson in this game, sit JD McKissic, and flex Devin Singletary, sit Zach Moss. So looking at this backfield, I'll start with the Washington side of things because it's a little easier to kind of sort through. I think last week was kind of an anomaly when we look at Gibson's usage. The snap share was the same. The rush attempts were pretty close, but the targets that he saw in week one, I think is going to be more in line with what we're going to see long-term with Gibson. 26% target share is a little much, but that 5 target kind of range is what I'm expecting out of Gibson week in and week out. I am not worried about Antonio Gibson. A lot of people after Thursday Night Football messaged me on Twitter and DM'd me on Discord and stuff and said, are you worried about Antonio Gibson? And I have Antonio Gibson in my home league, in the league I care most about. I'm not worried as a Gibson owner because with Taylor Heinicke, he is going to throw the ball to Gibson more than he did last week. Taylor Heinicke threw the ball 3 of Gibson's 5 targets in week 1, and he actually looked his way. When you watch the game, he looked his way very often. So I'm not expecting Taylor Heinicke to just not check down. I don't think that's going to be like a narrative that happens. I think Taylor Heinicke is going to utilize Gibson because he is the second best offensive player, the best offensive player on the team, depending on how you think of Terry McLaurin. So he's going to get his opportunities. He got 25 in week 1. He'll be just fine. Fire him up in your lineup. Have no worries there. He's a top 12 running back for me on the week. When we look at the Buffalo Bills side of things, though, Devin Singletary is not a guy that I'm very excited about if I own Devin Singletary, because Zach Moss came back last week. He looked pretty good. I think he's going to start to eat into Devin Singletary's workload more and more. Devin Singletary is still a flex, obviously, but I think his role is going to diminish a bit. Zach Moss is going to continue to balance that out, continue to close that gap between those two guys. Last year, for most of the year, they were kind of 50-50 split at running back, and I think that's going to continue this year. Singletary is currently my RB33 in my rankings right now. This front is legit, right? The Washington football team front is very hard to run against. I would start both Broncos running backs, Tony Pollard, James White, Nyheim Hines, over Devin Singletary in this game against Washington. And if Josh Jacobs is out, if Darrell Henderson is out, I'd also start both of their backups ahead of Devin Singletary as well in this game. So when we look at the Colts and Titans, this is another pretty straightforward game, right? We know exactly what the running backs are in this game. We know that you start official pass-catching running back Derrick Henry, which is completely wild. Derrick Henry this year has more targets than Austin Eckler, which is something I would never thought I would have said before the season. He has as many targets as Alvin Kamara, which is completely wild. So I have no idea what the fuck's going on with Derrick Henry in the passing game, but either way, you fire him up. He's a stud. Jonathan Taylor and Nyheim Hines, of course, you start both of those guys as well. Probably more of a flex play on Nyheim Hines in any kind of PPR league. This past week was an anomaly, in my opinion, in terms of the target share that we saw for these two running backs. As I talked about last week with these Colts guys, I don't think these receivers are very impressive. Zach Pascal, Michael Pittman Jr., and they looked pretty good in this past week's game. But I think this running game is going to power this offense. It's going to power this offense in the passing game as well. I think we're going to see Nyheim Hines get 6, 7, 8 targets a game. We're going to see Jonathan Taylor get 4 or 5 targets a game. And these guys are going to be the engine of the offense. I'm not really worried about either guy getting a 3% target share and a 5% target share. They were playing the Los Angeles Rams, which make it difficult on your running backs in general because they're so fast up front that it's pretty hard to get those guys in space. So I'm not worried about these guys. Jonathan Taylor is an every week starter for me. He's a top 10 running back. Go trade for him if the opposing owner is concerned about Jonathan Taylor, because I'm not concerned one bit. And Nyheim Hines is another guy that you can throw into your lineup pretty much as a top 30 PPR running back every single week. To the Saints at the Patriots, again, pretty straightforward. Alvin Kamara is in your lineup each and every week. He was one of my biggest buy low candidates on the trade targets video that I talked about yesterday. As I talked about in that video, you guys can see on the screen right now that Kamara's usage this year is up from what it's been in previous years with the departure of Latavius Murray. They're not giving Tony Jones that Latavius Murray, Mark Ingram role quite yet. They're giving him kind of a smaller role, and Kamara is the lead dog in this offense. So I think he's going to be just fine. Don't panic about Alvin Kamara. He's going to be a guy that gets all of his volume, all of his targets, everything that you want him to get, he's going to get. So don't panic about Alvin Kamara. On the Damian Harris and James White side of things, I think you can start Damian Harris, flex James White as usual. Basically just rehashing the point on the Patriots backfield that I talked about last week. Harris is the primary ball carrier. As you guys can see, he gets most of the rush attempts, and he's a damn good one at that, right? You saw the run that he had last week. It looked kind of Beastquake-esque. And he also runs behind a great offensive line that's going to open up a lot of holes for him. So Damian Harris is a guy that I think is going to be a weekly RB2 every single week. And James White, again, much like Nyheim Hines, is a weekly PPR flex option that you can throw into your lineup each and every week. And he should get you 6, 7 targets a game. So both of these guys you can fire up in this game. I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of running back usage in this game, with Saints and Patriots are two of the best teams in terms of how they use their running backs in the NFL. So a lot of running backs in this one. Falcons at Giants. Speaking of, a lot of running backs, Saquon Barkley is a guy that a lot of people are probably panicking about. I'm not panicking. I'm starting him in my lineup. If I have him, flex Mike Davis and sit Cordero Patterson. So On the Falcons side of things, don't chase last week's points. I know a lot of people probably went out and spent some fab on Cordell Patterson because he got like 7 targets and he got a couple carries as well. But the reason they used him so much in that game was probably a game plan thing. You cannot run against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense is historically one of the best run defenses of all time. I'm not even exaggerating when I say that. This stretch run that they've had over these past 2 or 3 years, they allow like less than 75 rushing yards per game. Like they're legitimately one of the best run defenses you'll ever see. So it doesn't shock me that they use Cordell Patterson in the passing game a lot and Mike Davis in the passing game a lot, as opposed to trying to run them up the middle, because it's just a moot. Like it's not going to work out for you if you try and run against this defense. So Mike Davis and Cordell Patterson, as you guys can see the splits on the screen right now, Mike Davis is still the primary ball carrier. He's still the guy that actually runs more routes than Cordell Patterson. So I'm still willing to put him in my flex spot. Cordell Patterson is a guy that I think I'm going to let other people chase on the waiver wire. And in my league, actually, nobody even picked him up. So I did pick him up as like a speculative ad, but he's not a guy that I was willing to drop $5, $10, $15 of fab on. So if you picked up Cordell Patterson, I would not throw him into your lineup this week. I don't think this role that he had last week is going to stand. And an interesting note to go on Mike Davis is that he didn't actually get the red zone work, but the snap percentage, the carries, and the targets were all in favor of Mike Davis. So he is the guy that you flex in this backfield. Now on the Saquon side of things, he's a whole different animal, right? He showed big jumps in his usage last week, which was a huge, huge deal for me. I wanted to see his usage go up. This week is a much easier matchup than he saw last week as well. The Washington football team front, as I talked about already, is really legit. It's really good defensive front. It's hard to run against this team. The Saquon buying window, if you guys want to buy Saquon Barkley in your redraft leagues, it's about to close, because Saquon Barkley, I think, is going to have a bounce back game in this one. I think we're going to see the true Saquon Barkley that we saw in 2018, 2019. Last week, we saw him get on the board with 84% of the snaps. He had a big run, 74% of the routes, got all the short down and distance, got most of the long down and distance, and all of the 2-minute drill snaps. Because what we love about Saquon Barkley, we know this is a bad offense. We know this offensive line isn't very good. But what we love about Saquon Barkley is, one, he's super talented and he's going to break away a lot of plays. But two, he gets a lot of volume. He gets an 85% snap share. He gets all of the routes for the backfield, all of the targets for the backfield, all of the short down and distance and goal line snaps, all of the 2-minute drill snaps. He's a true workhorse back who's very talented. Even though he's in a bad offense, he can make it work just like Christian McCaffrey has for so many years. So Saquon Barkley, if you have him, put him in your lineup. You won't regret it. So moving on to the next game, we have the Bengals at the Steelers. And again, this one's quick and easy. Both of these guys are top 10 running backs from a workload standpoint. It is worth noting that when we look at this Bengals run defense, it may actually be pretty good. We usually think of the Bengals run defense as an easy matchup, but they've held Dalvin Cook and David Montgomery so far this season to 3 yards per carry. So Najee Harris may not have some blow up game that we might be anticipating for him, because this Bengals run defense has been good so far this year. Their linebackers are healthy. Their defensive front is healthy. They added Trey Hendrickson and DJ Reader and some of these other run stoppers on their on their defensive line. So I really like their outlook to be able to limit Najee Harris in this game. So if you have Najee Harris, don't expect a smash game, basically. On the other side of the ball, we have Joe Mixon going up against a tough matchup on paper, obviously, the Steelers run defense, but they're getting hit with the injury bug. TJ Watt may not play in this game. Devin Bush may not play in this game. There's a chance that this run defense actually does allow some stuff to Joe Mixon in this one. So if I had to choose between these two running backs, and I doubt anybody has this decision, I would actually start Joe Mixon over Najee Harris, even though, you know, contrary to popular belief, a lot of people would think that to start Najee Harris over Joe Mixon because Najee Harris has the easier matchup, quote unquote, but that's not the way I view it. So the next game that we have here, Ravens at Lions, start DeAndre Swift, flex Tyson Williams. Again, this one's pretty straightforward as well. DeAndre Swift is a bona fide top 12 running back, and you really can't convince me otherwise, because as the numbers bear out, he gets the important work in the offense. He gets the receiving work. He gets the 2-minute drill work. He gets the long down and distance, the short yardage. He's super explosive. He's super talented. Everything about DeAndre Swift screams start me every single week, because this Lions offense is pretty good. It's not that bad. It's not a dumpster fire like some people thought it was going to be. This is exactly what I expected out of the Lions offense. You have a veteran quarterback, a good offensive line, a couple good weapons. This offense is basically what Carolina's was last year, what the Raiders was last year, where it's going to produce a couple fantasy producers, but it's not a world beater offense by any means. So when you look at DeAndre Swift, this is a guy that I think can be a weekly top 12 running back. This is a guy that is game script proof. If they're losing, he's going to get the ball more, in my opinion. So Jamal Williams, while he's a good player and he's a good player to spell DeAndre Swift, he's nothing more than a desperation play. If you're going to throw him into your lineup, he's a guy that gets like 30% of the snaps. As you guys can see, he only had 22 snaps on Monday night, 12 routes run, 3 targets and 7 carries. 10 opportunities per game is not much to get you excited about. And if DeAndre Swift and the Lions can be closer in games than they were with the Packers on Monday night, then those carry numbers should go up for both running backs. Then on the Ravens side of things, Tyson Williams to me remains one of the biggest sell highs in all of fantasy right now. I would much rather have a secured wide receiver than a back-end RB2 type like Tyson Williams. It looks like the Ravens are doing the same thing with Tyson Williams and Latavius Murray that they were probably going to do with J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. And we were worried about J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards usage because Lamar runs the ball so much. But now we're downgrading the talent of the player. We're adding in Devontae Freeman and Le'Veon Bell to the mix. I just don't really want anything to do with this Ravens backfield, sans Lamar Jackson, basically. So, because he's going to siphon a lot of touches away, I would go out and trade this guy away. If you have Tyson Williams, if you picked him up on waivers or whatever, go and try and trade him for Robert Woods or Chase Claypool or T. Higgins or somebody in that range of wide receiver, because I think those guys are going to pay off a lot more than a guy like Tyson Williams will long-term. So to the next game that we have here is the Jets at the Broncos. This one's pretty simple as well. Sit all the Jets running backs, and I think you can low-end flex both of the Broncos running backs. As I discussed yesterday, Carter's role increased. So if you guys have Michael Carter, if he's available on your waiver wire, go and pick him up and stash him, because as you guys can see on the screen, from week 1 to week 2, he nearly doubled his snap share and he nearly doubled his percentage of the carries and the routes and stuff like that. He saw a big uptick in his role. So that is encouraging to see out of Michael Carter because he is a rookie running back. And I'll get to this on Javonte Williams. Rookie running backs, typically their workload goes up as the season goes along. And we're already seeing that progression in Michael Carter and in Javonte Williams in this game. So the Broncos backfield, again, it's encouraging. A lot of people who own Javonte Williams are probably discouraged with what has happened so far, but like I said already, rookie running backs, they scale production as the season goes along. If you think of J.K. Dobbins, if you think of DeAndre Swift and Cam Akers and some of these guys last year, they didn't necessarily see that type of production early in the season that even Javonte Williams is seeing now. This is a guy that is getting the ball 15 times a game, which is not something you could have said about those guys that I just mentioned last year. This is a good thing, not a bad thing. The fact that he's getting this much volume early in the season is a good thing. And I know you guys probably spent a 6th, 7th round pick on Javonte Williams, but don't trade him now. If you trade him now, then you're completely eating those bad weeks and trading away all the upside to other people. If you drafted Javonte Williams, you needed to be aware that this was a guy that was going to scale as the season went along. Eventually, Javonte Williams is going to have a game that puts him on the map, basically, and puts him, ahead of Melvin Gordon on the depth chart, and he'll be the starting running back. That's really all it takes. One really good game out of Javonte Williams, and I believe he is the back to own here going forward. Another great trade target, in my opinion, for those of you guys that are 2-0 right now, and you need some running back depth, or maybe you did a hero RB and you have Dalvin Cook, but you have like James Whites and Nyheim Hines as your RB2. You can go out and trade Javonte Williams, use those pass catching running backs in the meantime. And then when Javonte Williams takes over the job, then you'll have a stud running back behind your already studly running back in like CMC, Alvin Kamara, or Dalvin Cook. So that's exactly what I'd be doing and how I'd handle the Broncos running back situation if you guys were curious. As you guys can see on the screen right now, it is Melvin Gordon running the show. He is getting most of the routes and the targets, short down and distance, long down and distance, but Javonte Williams is eating into that workload. He's getting a good amount of carries, and I think that's only going to go up as the season goes along. So the Dolphins at the Raiders. In this game, you can flex Myles Gaskin and Josh Jacobs if he plays, but if he's out, I think Kenyon Drake is also a good flex option. When you look at the Dolphins backfield with Myles Gaskin, he doesn't really have a monopoly on any part of this backfield, which is why I didn't want to draft him in the first place. Why I also don't really like him going forward long-term, because as you guys can see, he's splitting the rush attempts. He's splitting the routes. He's splitting the targets. He's splitting the targets per route run, short down and distance. The only thing he really has a grasp on or a hold on is the long down and distance and 2-minute drill snaps. So this is a guy that I think is going to be in back-end RB2 purgatory for the rest of the season. And I think a lot of people are going to view him as higher than that. So if you do have Myles Gaskin, I would be much more likely to trade him away for a high-end wide receiver that's maybe had some down games or something like that, if you can pull that off. And on the Raiders side of things, John Gruden basically called Josh Jacobs very questionable, which doesn't sound very good, obviously, heading into week 3. So hopefully he just sits. And if you guys have Kenyon Drake or to keep Josh Jacobs healthy long-term, they just sit him. Kenyon Drake in his absence will probably take a full workload. As you guys can see on the screen, Kenyon Drake took a full workload with Josh Jacobs out of the lineup last week, 71% of the snaps, only 29% of the rush attempts, but he got 81% route participation, 17% target share. So he's kind of like a pseudo Chase Edmonds if Josh Jacobs is out of the lineup, which makes him like a borderline top 25 running back, in my opinion. So if Josh Jacobs is out of the lineup, you can fire up Kenyon Drake. If Josh Jacobs plays, I'll probably address that later in the week, but Josh Jacobs playing in this game coming off of an injury is not somebody that I really want to trust. So if Josh Jacobs plays, he'll probably be in that RB 25 to 30 range, but I won't be too excited about him. So the next game that we have here is the Buccaneers at the Rams. First big test for my Tampa Bay Buccaneers, in my opinion. I don't think the Cowboys and the Atlanta Falcons were too much of a big test for us. This one should be a really good game, in my opinion. In this game, you can flex Leonard Fournette, and you can also flex whatever running back starts for the Los Angeles Rams. So if Darrell Henderson starts, which I don't think he will, then you can start him. But if he doesn't start, you can flex Sony Michel. The injury to Henderson is ironically the exact same injury that Cam Akers suffered at the exact same time in the exact same week last year in week 2. So Cam Akers basically suffered what's called like a rib contusion or something like that. And it's a 3 to 4 week recovery, according to Dr. Jesse Morris of the Fantasy Doctors. And it caused Cam Akers to miss 2 games last year. So it sounds like Darrell Henderson's probably going to miss this game based on that kind of medical information that we know. If Henderson sits, Michel is currently my RB 28. And I have them ranked right now as if Henderson is going to sit. Obviously, I'll change that if something changes. But Michel is currently my RB 28. The matchup is horrid, obviously, right? You don't run the ball against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but he has a good chance to get into the end zone because this game should be high scoring. We know the Bucs are going to put up points on the other side of the ball, and he has a good chance to catch some passes, as we saw from Mike Davis last week. So if you have Sony Michel, I think he's a decent flex option if Darrell Henderson sits. As you guys can see on the screen, Sony Michel handled 89% of the snaps and 100% of the rushing attempts when Darrell Henderson went out. So like I said, if he sits, if Darrell Henderson is out for this game, you can throw Sony Michel into your flex spot. And on the other side of things, I never thought I'd say this, but Leonard Fournette is a great buy low in fantasy right now because Leonard Fournette is the starting running back of this team. And not when I say like he's the starting running back, but like there's no starting running back. Like he actually is the feature back for this team. Because when you look at the usage of these guys, 60% of the rushing attempts and 52% of the rushing attempts in back-to-back weeks for Leonard Fournette. He also gets the primary third down role. He also is capable of breaking off big plays, as we've seen in the past. He's getting a pretty good target share, and he's getting targeted when he's running routes. So this is a guy that's actually low-key one of the cheaper feature backs in the NFL right now, and he's in one of the best, if not the best, offense in the league. So he's getting all the valuable work. They haven't had any goal line carries between any of the running backs yet, but they will eventually. They're not going to keep throwing 5 touchdowns a game. Eventually, Leonard Fournette or Ronald Jones is going to get some goal line carries. And Ronald Jones literally makes at least one mistake a week, which is basically, in Bruce Arians' eyes, I'm sure, is limiting his trust in Ronald Jones. So Leonard Fournette getting the bulk of the carries, all the routes, all the targets, and will probably also get the goal line work once we get some goal line work out of this backfield. He's going to be a guy that is going to be a top 24 running back, in my opinion. And I think you can get him for a lot cheaper than that right now. So if you guys need a running back right now, I think Leonard Fournette is a guy that you should be targeting, especially in PPR, because I think this guy is actually like a 3 to 4 target per game guy. And he could have some 6-7 target games, especially in this one where they're probably going to have a problem getting things done on the ground. So the next game that we have here is the Seahawks and the Vikings. Start Dalvin Cook in this game, pretty straightforward, and also start Chris Carson. Chris Carson is basically the dude in this backfield in every facet of the game. His only real issue is effectiveness, right? Last week we saw him score 2 touchdowns, but he was really ineffective on the ground in general. And can he stay healthy long-term? So as long as he's on the field, he's basically getting RB1 usage. As you guys can see, 71% of the rush attempts so far this year, 54% route participation, 6% target share, 73% short down and distance, all the goal line carries. Like, this is a guy that is legitimately getting RB1 usage. He's just an RB2 because he's not quite good enough to be an RB1. And he's also a guy that, maybe doesn't stay healthy long-term as well. So he's a guy that you fire up into your lineup as long as he's healthy, but he makes me a little nervous if I do own Chris Carson. I would rather have David Montgomery, Joe Mixon, Najee Harris, Jonathan Taylor, Antonio Gibson, if you can pull off a trade like that. So to the Packers at 49ers, this is the Sunday night football game. Start Aaron Jones. Obviously, we just saw him had a monster game against the Detroit Lions where he scored 4 touchdowns. If you can float elite running back offers for Aaron Jones, go ahead and do that. If you can get Alvin Kamara straight up for Aaron Jones, if you can get Jones plus a small piece for Christian McCaffrey, go ahead and try and do that if you own Aaron Jones, because as much as I think he's going to be a good running back this year, a top 5, top 8 running back, he's not as valuable as those other guys. So coming off a big game with some of those guys coming off a down game, specifically Kamara, maybe you can pull like a 1-for-1 swap and upgrade your running back position. On the 49ers side of things, that's a lot more complex. Elijah Mitchell suffered a shoulder injury in last week's game. Jermichael Hasty had a high ankle sprain, and Trey Sermon suffered a concussion. So depending on everybody who's playing in this game, if Elijah Mitchell is the only running back in this backfield, which is, I think, the likely scenario, then Elijah Mitchell is a top 20 running back. Now, if Trey Sermon plays, because it is a concussion, sometimes players come back within a week from concussions, Elijah Mitchell's still a top 25 running back, and Trey Sermon's probably a guy you want to just wait and see what his role is. So don't start him if he does play. But Elijah Mitchell, nonetheless, is probably a guy that you're going to be comfortable throwing into your flex spot in this game because he is the primary ball carrier, at least for this team right now. So fire up Mitchell as a top 20 running back if Sermon doesn't play. He's still a strong flex if Sermon does play, though. So the final game of the slate here, Monday Night Football, Eagles at Cowboys. Start Ezekiel Elliott, start Miles Sanders, and then you can flex Tony Pollard, low-end flex Kenny Gainwell. So both of these backfields kind of have a similar dynamic. They have a primary ball carrier and like this third down, explosive type of guy. So Miles Sanders, as you guys can see on the screen right now, is getting pretty big usage. And I actually think Miles Sanders is a guy that a lot of people are sleeping on right now because 67% of the snaps, over 50% of the rushing attempts, good share of the routes as well, good target share, good short down and distance, he gets everything that's valuable, right? We know he can break away big plays. We know he's getting the bulk of the carries. We know he's going to get most of the targets. We know he's getting all the short down and distance goal line work. Everything is there for Miles Sanders. The only thing he doesn't really get is the 2-minute drill, which is what Kenny Gainwell gets. He's like the Boston Scott of this offense. So I really like Miles Sanders as a guy that is kind of going under the radar as like an RB2 type. So if you can flip like a Tyson Williams, Clyde Edwards-Helaire or something like that for Miles Sanders, I would go out and do that because I think he's a lot safer than those guys. So on the Dallas side of things, I think Tony Pollard is one of the bigger sell highs in fantasy right now because I think you can pull a big time upgrade from Tony Pollard right now because he's producing so well. If you could sell him straight up for Miles Sanders, as I just mentioned in this game, I would absolutely do that. He simply isn't involved enough to be anything more than a flex RB3. And yes, if anything happens to Zeke Elliott, Tony Pollard's going to be great. But the problem with that statement is that Zeke Elliott has missed 2 games in his entire career due to injury. So the likelihood of Zeke Elliott getting injured is not very high. Tony Pollard is a handcuff, but he's like a guy with standalone value, sure, but not a guy that is going to produce big time if Zeke Elliott gets hurt because Zeke has never really suffered a big injury, nor has he missed games for nagging injuries. So Tony Pollard, a guy that I think you can get a lot more for right now than what he's actually worth. He's had some big games. You probably sell him very high right now. As you guys can see the usage on the screen right now, this is Zeke Elliott's backfield. Tony Pollard is going to mix in, but Tony Pollard, when he mixes in, is going to be effective. And that's basically what we knew kind of coming into the season. And that's exactly what's played out. So that's all the running back backfields. That's the kind of week 3 running back starts and sits that you guys were looking for. If you enjoyed this video, like the video, of course, comment any of your thoughts down below, any running back questions or anything like that. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. And if you want access to our weekly rankings, as I talked about already, one of 3 ways you can get it, $20 on our website, thefantasystockexchange.com. You can get our weekly rankings that way. Number 2, you can go to underdogfantasy.com, deposit using promo code FSE. You will also get our weekly rankings for free as a result of doing that. And you can go to patreon.com/fantasystockexchange, become a Patreon member, and you will also get our weekly rankings as a part of both tiers. So 3 ways you can get the rankings. Go check those out. Peace out, guys, and I'll talk to you soon.